want to make sure that you can hear me. Thank you so much for being here today, and I want to thank the team preparing the Advanced Care Summit today for inviting me to join all of you. As Rob mentioned, most recently I had the honor of representing the constituents of House District 24 in the Utah House of Representatives for well over 10 years and retired from that position just this past year. There's so much that one learns from serving the community when you're in elected office or you're doing community advocacy, as I know you all well know. And I'm hoping that my experiences and my reflections on my work in the House as well as in the community will situate you all to make the best of what you're learning and you'll be discussing today with some great folks that are helping you out. I want to start out by sharing an encounter I experienced early on as a newly elected state representative. During my first term in elected office, I received a frantic phone call from a constituent. She detailed her concerns about her mother, who had just recently passed away. She had alleged at the time that a family member who lived with her mother had been finding ways to convince her mother to give him money and authority over her affairs. So she was alleging that a family member who lived with her mother had been finding ways to convince her mother to give him money and authority over her affairs. The constituent had been in touch with their Adult Protective Services folks, and I am always appreciative for the folks at APS. Over the years, I've gotten to know them very well as someone that works with constituents and gotten to know about the challenges that they encounter in navigating cases like these. And what I've learned is it's not always simple or easy to fix a situation like this. The story, like so many, was fraught with strained relationships between siblings. And for those of you who work with vulnerable adults and their families, you know the answers are complicated. But this was new for me. I was a brand new legislator. I struggled to find the right answers for her, to seek some solution. I wanted to be responsive, to give her what she wanted. I mean, isn't that what we as legislators, as policymakers are supposed to do? Provide an immediate fix for our constituents, helping her when she felt she wasn't getting what she wanted. As a novice legislator, I really struggled with this quandary, and augmenting it was the fact that my own 91-year-old mother had just recently passed away. And the emotions and the personal anxiety I struggled with as to whether or not I had done everything I should have done to make her last days the best were still an open wound for me. This constituent wanted all to be made right in a situation that was complicated by the delicate balance we know that must be struck, to respect the autonomy of an aged adult, at the same time ascertaining what was alleged was true and what could be done to remedy the situation. I preface my comments today with the fact that my schooling is not in law or public safety or even social work or medicine, but I learned so much from those of you who are in those professions and the skills that you bring to the work that you do. As an elected official who is often brought into negotiating tense and potentially challenging situations, I quickly learned that one of the most helpful tools I could get to the crux of a problem and hopefully on my way to a solution was just to simply listen. What was absolutely essential was that I needed to tackle one of the most hardest things to do in these situations, and that was to get to the answer of a very basic question. What do you need? I find often when I'm in these situations that people tell me what they want, but sometimes that doesn't really get to where the problem really exists. Where does it really lie? Over time, with continued conversations and listening, by researching what might have been done in similar situations or looking at case law in other states or other circumstances, learning from other states and their policies and laws, I would discover that the answer was sometimes extremely nuanced, but I could eventually get to what a person needed. And sometimes that was very different what they said they wanted. What do you need? Sometimes a client or a constituency or an advocacy group or a community has a hard time articulating what that is. And it's often up to us, as those to whom they've come to address a concern, to peel away at the layers of the request, the appeal, the question, to get to the core of what can bring them peace of mind, to get them to the place where they feel they've been heard. So back to my constituent. She felt that the APS worker who she was working with could and should have been able to do more. And what we discovered as I worked with the administration and staffers from the agency was that the reporting process could have been clarified a bit more effectively. But it wasn't necessarily the fault of the caseworker. And over time and work, and as a result, improvements were made to some of those protocols. But we wouldn't have known about it if she hadn't made that first call and she hadn't reached out to me. I know I wasn't able to get this constituent what she wanted, which was an undoing of where she felt her mother had been wronged, the punishing of a family member, an apology, an acknowledgement from not only that family member, but from others, a turning back of the clock to a time where she felt her parent would have been more protected. But what she needed, and what she expressed to me a number of times, is that others might have a different result than she. And that's what we were able to achieve to a certain extent. In addition, this invitation to work with this constituent as well as with the agency presented me with an opportunity to work with APS at a time during the middle of the Great Recession, when all state agencies were being hit with severe budget cuts. And this was just at a time when vulnerable adults were being taken advantage of at alarming rates, precisely because those who they trusted were also struggling economically. It was a perfect storm, but it opened an opportunity for legislators and agency folks to work together to assure that vulnerable adults were not abused, neglected, or harmed. What do you need? There are times when those of us who work in this area of public service must also ask that of ourselves. Why are we called to the vocations within which we find ourselves? I am personally a strong believer in the strengths of exploring our own stories, and they shared her story. Stories are so important to know what drives us to do what we do. I believe that when we do this, it really does make us better at working with others. For me, the journey began with a car ride. It was during the mid-1960s, and I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. That age where you start to remember things that happened to you with relative clarity. This picture of me in the middle of the field was probably taken when I was only 3, but here I am holding a sugar beet. I was sitting in the back seat of our Ford Fairlane, and my mom was driving. We lived on a produce farm on the outskirts of Utah County. The farms near us were dotted with fields of onions, sugar beets, tomato, and corn. And the only way that the small farmers like my dad could get through the growing season was with the help of Mexican migrant farm workers who worked side by side with him and my brothers to keep up with the daily drive of planting and weeding and harvesting our crops. That particular morning, my mom drove us to the home of a nearby migrant family. And waiting for us was a young, pregnant Mexican farm worker. She got into the front seat of our car, and I could tell that she had been crying. As we made our way down the rural highways that snaked toward nearby towns, I could tell my mother was trying to calm her, speaking about family and home in the comforting Spanish conversational tones that often soothed me to sleep. We arrived about a half an hour later at the office of our family doctor. We all went into the examination room together. I remember my mother interpreting for the doctor and for the pregnant woman. The doctor examined the woman, and we soon left. What I remember of this experience was not exactly what was said, but more than anything, how calm the woman was when we were driving home. She was smiling, not crying, chatting with my mom. Her anxiety was totally dissipated. The imprint of that experience has stayed with me at every turn as I made my way into an adulthood, and that lesson being, when someone needs help, you use your talents and your resources to help them. It was intrinsic for both my parents to not turn someone away, to never have an idle moment where you could instead work or volunteer or roll up your sleeves to help someone. I've written my own story more than once, and each time that I do this, I have an aha moment, remembering something else that happened to me or someone who taught me a life lesson that colors who I am and why I do what I do. I've even resorted to putting together this me tree, kind of like a family tree. It's a little bit different. What it includes is characteristics, values, or qualities I have developed that I have find valuable, that have been imprinted on me by people in my life. So, for example, like from my mom, she taught me the importance of resiliency, unconditional love, dedication, a love of reading and learning, tenacity, and service to others. My dad taught me the qualities of hard work, loyalty, love of culture, being proud of being a Latina, Mexicana, unconditional love, devotion to family and friends, sacrifice, and patience. A dear friend of mine, Graciela, who is a mentor and a former boss of mine, taught me the qualities of opportunity, grasping for things when they're in front of you, risk, not being afraid to take a risk, because sometimes it's really hard to do when you're moving into a space that's unknown, celebration, being celebratory about things that happen that are good, especially when you're in the midst of something that's very challenging, and again, tenacity and knowledge. So I invite you to think about your own me tree in the sense of who are the people in your life that have influenced who you are. Family origin, life experience, a story we've heard, being propelled into a space because of an educational opportunity or work opportunity, meeting a client, mentor, a coworker, a teacher who awakens something within us. Sometimes it's intentional. You thought you were moving in this direction. Other times it's accidental. It's thrust upon you. These are the experiences that take us on life's path. And sometimes in the work that you are all doing, the work that we do in public service, we're so focused on trying to help others that we don't check in doing why we do what we do. Why am I here? What calls me to this area of service? So I can't overstate the importance of doing this every once in a while, that periodic check to establish our true north and understand what drives us. When we do, it can help us reboot, refresh, or even redirect a career or vocation within which we find ourselves. So I'm going to take a few minutes right now to have you each pair up with people at your table. Maybe you'll need to group in groups of threes. And take 3 minutes or so to do the following. With this new person or your partner that you're sitting with, please share what you do, and then tell the person you're with why you've gotten into this particular vocation or doing what you're doing. And then I'm going to have a couple of you share the stories of your partner, if your partner's willing to have you do that after we let you visit for a while. But why do you do what you do? Let's take a few minutes to introduce yourself, and let's start that. And give some of you an opportunity to share. Do we have any takers who are interested in sharing either their story or the story of the person that they met, that they found was really compelling? Please, I'd love to see a couple of people share why they do what they do. Come on. Some takers? Yes. Senator, please. If you don't mind, there are some mics up here. Oh, he's going to bring you a mic, so hold on just a half a second. And if there's someone else that in the meantime wants to be ready to share, please raise your hand and Adrian can help. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Senator, please.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying I appreciate all the hard work you've done, and I hope to follow in your footsteps.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I met my partner here. Her name is Ashley Lofton, and she is a critical incident coordinator. and she was talking about aged protective services. And as a school teacher and a senator, I was just explaining to her that I had no idea how many people we have employed to take care of our aged population, and I was really shocked. And I'm just fortunate that I got to be a part of this situation and learn some more about this. But she tries to help people transition out of the hospital back into their homes, and she tries to protect the people that are vulnerable in our population that are aged. So I was excited to hear that.
Great, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
So we have another person right over here that's interested in sharing.
Good morning, everyone. I have the privilege of sitting next to this lovely lady here by name Mary, and she just shared with me, we're both nurses, so obviously there was a common denominator, but she's a hospice nurse. And the fascinating thing that she said to me was that her mother had been a hospice nurse, and she went into a nursing career to be a hospice nurse. Usually nurses go in and then sort of decide where they're going to go, but she knew that that was what she wanted to do. And she was telling me that 58% of the people here actually die under hospice care, which is higher than most states. And so that is actually a tribute to us that we recognize that hospice is something that can be very helpful to families at the end of their life and to the individual. So, very fascinating lady. Thank you.
Wonderful. We have time for one more. Oh, good. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is James Brown. I'm here to sort of introduce myself and learn about what everything and what everybody's doing. But we are hosting a broadcast podcast that is now locally and going national, and the focus is on aging and everything about it. So we're going to try to tap into all of these organizations to shine the light on you and point out to people that as you age, it's not over. It's just, we're just resuming our lives, and we're going to try to tell everything and everybody all about everything that's going on.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. We do have, we have a couple more. We'll do one more here.
Thank you. I met Christy, and she's awesome. And she gave me some good thoughts to think about off of your comments as well, like that teachers are always available. So she started out as an x-ray physician, doing x-rays, and eventually evolved to administration. And I wish I would have asked her more questions about, you know, why that was important to her, how she felt she made a difference in the administrative role within hospitals. So I didn't get a chance to ask her too much in detail about that, but it was really important to her. And eventually she told me that she found teachers, she found a mentor. Just as you said, that there's teachers available, and we find them in the strangest places, and her mentor taught her how to die with dignity. And I thought that was pretty profound, because we're all gonna pass away someday. And she taught her how to have courage facing that, with respect as well. So it's just some thoughts that really are echoing in my mind, I should say, because that's the end for all of us, and we could all, I think, look forward to it in a way.
Wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing with each other. I really do invite you to do this with as many opportunities that you can grasp to share with each other, because that is what makes things better for the people that we serve. As we become more familiar with our own story, what drives us to serve in our vocation or work through the circumstances within which we find ourselves, either as patients or caretakers, or even as policymakers, and especially as policymakers, we have to exercise caution not to impose our experience onto others. Within your content of your scopes of practice, I know, and with ethical guidelines, I know that you work through this frequently. But sometimes I know I often have to be reminded, because when people come to us to help them solve their problems, we can, especially policymakers, think that our answer is the end-all be-all. Or we take what worked for one person and we try to apply it to the circumstance of another. And it's not necessarily the case. A deacon from a local Baptist congregation told me how he finds himself compelled and called to work for families and to be with patients in their final days. He said, quote, "There's a sense of compassion I feel when I'm in these situations, something that speaks to me to be there for people. For me, especially when I'm with a family that's African American, They may trust me more because I look like them. I let them do the talking, listening more than speaking. I sit back and watch what the family dynamics are. The last thing you want to do when you're me is get in the middle of it all because you look like judge and jury in that type of a situation, end quote. He adds, quote, as caretakers and providers, we have our script. But sometimes instead of going off our script, we should go off their script. Sometimes they just want us to be present. And sometimes I'm just there to sit with someone at the end of their life. We often have to own to the fact that we don't have the answer. And that puts us in a space of vulnerability that can sometimes feel like we're not going to be helpful to those clients that we're trying to serve. But that vulnerability can often help us authentically connect to finding the answers for those with whom we work. We just have to be open to finding the answer in places that are not always as they seem. This was just mentioned earlier. As I stated earlier, as a former state legislator, not having the answer and sometimes not being able to fix a situation was very difficult for me. And sometimes as an elected official, I had to fix things for my constituents. But I came to understand, to discern, with some helpful mentors and associates, that I wasn't going to be able to give them what they wanted, but that doesn't mean I wasn't able to find improvements to make things better for the system as a whole. It was precisely when I realized I couldn't fix things on my own, that I recognized my own vulnerability, that I then could find solutions and make those needed improvements. The variables that can affect this problem solving can be cultural. Talk about layers. Culture is not just ethnicity or race or religion or community experience. It can be the regional differences within our state or within neighborhoods. And it certainly can be colored by family expectations. So for example, I recently spoke with an Eastern Indian man in his mid-70s about what he has experienced with the end-of-life journeys of families and friends. And here are some of the issues he shared with me. He is an immigrant to the United States, but his parents were in India when they passed away. And he felt badly about the fact that he couldn't be there and that the care for his parents was left to one of his siblings. That can happen to many of us, but let's stop and think what that feels like for someone that might be separated by borders and continents and oceans. He told me, quote, my father died at home. My brother lived in our hometown, so he was able to take care of him, and I was so appreciative of that. There is often in our culture an expectation of the eldest son to care for parents. But so many of us have moved away from our homeland. It was an unfortunate chapter for me because I had a family here to support, and I couldn't be with my father until close to the end, unquote. This gentleman also shared with me that his family is Christian, and sometimes assumptions are made regarding religious backgrounds of people of different cultures. There are many, many religions, sometimes within a given culture, and making sure you understand this is important when working with a family in providing end-of-life care and planning. For caregivers who are from refugee populations, the hurdles can be extremely overwhelming. A Pakistani Muslim woman who serves her community by preparing the deceased's body for final rites told me she's had some really great experiences with funeral homes and cemeteries. She's noted that many cemeteries nowadays provide special burial areas for the Muslim community. But the challenges she sees lie more in what family members may or may not know what's available to them. Family members from refugee communities can be very hesitant to ask for help. She said, quote, sometimes the caregiver won't ask because they don't want to make any waves. For those who may not even be using hospice or those who don't have a formal education, they just don't know where to start, especially if the caregiver is older. If I'm taking care of my husband, I'm so overwhelmed, I may not remember something that somebody's told me. Think about the language or the cultural barrier that complicates communication. She added, I think the caregivers often need more help than the patients do, unquote. The issue may not even be cultural, but situational. A social worker who works with people experiencing homelessness noted her frustration with how patients are sometimes dealt with. She said, people don't often give as much respect for patients who are experiencing homelessness. That's why I'm so happy for the programs like those offered at the in-between. Kim and her team gives these patients the family that's often not there for him. I once had to confront a doctor that was getting after my client for not taking better care of himself. He was almost shouting at him. I told him, you don't need to do that to someone who's transitioning. They need the same level of peace as any other patient, just like any other human being that is facing death, end quote. You can see from these comments that there are many commonalities that individuals and families experience as they prepare for the passing of a loved one. But there are also variations. The key is to try not to make assumptions, to avoid the propensity to see the world through our own experiences and our own eyes. You'll notice that there were so many cultures and life experiences and circumstances which I was unable to even provide a glimpse. Those distinctions can include ability, sexual orientation and fluidity, and socioeconomic status. When my own mother was nearing the end of her life, what I discovered was that a lot of what she had told me previously through her planning changed a lot from what she told me as she got closer to facing her own mortality. Prior insistence on a lack of extraordinary care was now being reconsidered. And as her primary caregiver, I found what was up was now down and vice versa. I had wonderful family members to help, but it was also confusing for me. I was struggling to draw the distinction between what she wanted and what she needed. For Latinx families, more often than not, a wife, a daughter, or a daughter-in-law finds herself in the primary caregiver role, and there is often a very strong sense of guilt to ask for help, even from other family members, let alone service providers. A stigma can be placed on family members who choose to place a loved one in assisted care or hospice as not doing their duty by keeping a patient at home and helping. Numerous peer-reviewed studies know that Latino families underutilize hospice service despite their growing demographic in our communities. And since Latinas are, as a population, comprise a disproportionately high number of individuals over 85 years old, it's important to break through those expectations, to show those families need to make sure that they're taking care of themselves so they can be there for their dying loved one. In asking, what do you need? Be ready for the answer because it can be surprising and eye-opening. It drives the client. What drives the client, a constituent, or a community to say what they do? Are there histories we need to know about? Are there past experiences that leave people wary? Are there traditions about which we must be made aware? How many of you have seen the movie The Farewell? Oh my gosh. If you haven't seen it, I strongly, strongly encourage you to see it. It's out right now. It's in release. And it is about a Chinese-American young woman who struggles with the passing of her grandmother and the challenges of dealing with her family and how they have an expectation of how to care for that loved one. It's called The Farewell. It just got released. Please, please, please take a friend and go watch that movie. It's a wonderful movie. I encourage you to watch movies like that, to know about how families of different cultures experience and navigate end of life. Read books, read articles. How many of you have read Atul Gawande's Being Mortal? Being Mortal? Yeah, excellent book. Again, those types of books help color your understanding. And I know that you'll explore the nuance of culture later on today, but I ask you to take the totality of what you're hearing today as a sampling, just a start, that will propel you to learn more. At the same time, cautioning against overgeneralization, but understand that culture is part and parcel of a person's life. They are individuals, and I know you all know this, those of you that are in the care of people with every new patient, with every new client, is a whole new set of circumstances. Being attuned to these things, culture, family of origin, the orientation, is the first step to being able to know what people need and what you need to work with them. Your focus today is exploring how to meet your family's or a client's or a community's needs as individuals prepare for their advanced care. You have wonderful people here today that will walk you through exploring the nuance of those issues. All I ask of you is to be open, to be aware, be ready to explore what you need as you learn how not to necessarily have the perfect answer, but to be the authentic listener, the authentic practitioner, the authentic human for the people you meet and serve each day. Have an amazing and productive day, and I thank Comagine and the team for inviting me to kick it off for you. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much.